Good morning. Today we got lots of chapters to cover with yesterday and today. We're going to look at 1 Samuel 19 through 24, 6 chapters. And these 6 chapters all focus on kind of the same thing. Saul trying to kill David. And of course we know that Saul is the acting king that has been anointed by Samuel, chosen by God, and that God has found great displeasure with King Saul and has had Samuel anoint David as king. So we have 2 kings of the Hebrews right now, of Israel. And of course, David isn't trying to take the kingship from Saul, but yet there's an awful lot of intrigue going on in these chapters. And chapter 19, begins with Saul spoke with his son Jonathan and with his servants about killing David because of what he has learned and all of that. And of course we know also that Saul's son Jonathan has accepted David as a very, very dear and trusted friend, another brother sort of, maybe that way, and is very loyal to David, more loyal to David than actually to his father. And so Jonathan tells David of his father's plans. And Jonathan continues throughout all of this to speak well of David to the king. And the king isn't having any of it. And as we get to verse 10 of this chapter 19, Saul sends people to David's house to keep watch over him, planning to kill him in the morning. But David's wife, Michal, Saul's daughter, finds out about that and lets David out and puts an idol in David's bed. And this is another one of those things. What was they got an idol for? That they would be large enough that they could put it in the bed and put a wig on it and make it look like David was in bed and sick. It's just crazy. Why would they have an idol like that? Anyway, they did. And so the messengers come and, they're told that he's sick. So he sends other messengers to check on that. And when they come in, and the idol is in the bed, covered with goat's hair. And Saul is upset with his daughter. Why did you deceive me? I guess I'd be upset with my daughter too, on a deal like that. But, his daughter says, he said to me, let me go. Why should I kill you? Michal was loyal to her husband as well and not understanding her father's anger. But David fled and escaped and came to Samuel at this town called Ramah and told him all that had happened. And so David and Samuel are now traveling together for a while, at least anyway. And Saul continues looking, and people continue, telling Saul where David is. This is what a loyal citizen would do, right? Report to the king what he wants to know. But David continues to flee. But as the chapter 19 ends, as some of Saul's messengers have come to this place, they have become in a frenzy and have prophesied. And the same thing happens to Saul. He comes and it just, the Spirit of God comes upon him that way. Chapter 20 again, David flees and he comes before Jonathan and asks, what have I done? Why is your dad? David doesn't know why either. But, but Jonathan again assures David that you will not die. My father doesn't do anything great or small without telling me, so when I know what's going on, I'm going to keep you informed. And so that absolute friendship between those two is very beneficial for King David, as we know that. And so David is wondering if he is going to be safe in Saul's presence, and Jonathan comes up with this plan that I'm going to find out from Dad what his intention is, And tomorrow I will go out to this and I will shoot 3 arrows, like I'm shooting at a target. And if I tell the person going to look for the arrows that they're on this side of him, well, that means it's safe to come back. But if I say, go further, that means you better not try to stay, David, and you better flee. And sure enough, the arrows go, and Jonathan's voice says, search further, and David understands that it's not safe for him to come. So he hides, and David again then leaves. And when Saul asks why David's chair at the table is empty for 2 days in a row, Jonathan says, well, he asked, he said to go to his father's house and for a sacrifice that they're going to do together. And of course, Jonathan is covering up for David that way as well. And, verse 30, Saul's anger was kindled against his son Jonathan. You son of a perverse, rebellious woman, he's mad at Jonathan and at Jonathan's mother, and, and he just goes on this rant against Jonathan and against David. And Jonathan comes with this sense of reason. Well, what has he done? Why does he deserve to? Jonathan sticks up for David. Jonathan knows that David is innocent in this, and that it isn't David, but it's God at work in all of this. And so David flees and comes to the town of Nob in chapter 21, and to the priest Abimelech. And David is there with them, and then when Saul finds out that these priests had hid David for a while, provided for him, he comes because it's a man named Doeg, Doug, whatever you want to say it, reported to Saul where David was. And Saul and his armies come, and Saul is going to put these priests all to death, but most of his men refuse to do that, except Saul then has this Doeg, Doug, to do that, and they killed 75 priests because they had hidden David. And one of them escapes and goes to tell to David that way. And but as David is fleeing from Saul, and he gets to this town of Gath, the people there are still singing the chant, Saul has killed his thousands and David his 10,000s. And so this, his reputation is still there. And it says David took those words to heart and was afraid then of the king of Gath and Saul. So he pretended he was a madman, and he would make marks on the walls, and he was, he put on an act for them. And he left there. He escaped then to a cave, it says. And his father, all of his brothers from his father's house heard and came then to him. And everyone who was in distress and debt, and people came to David. And David became the leader of quite a group of people. And he asked the king of another area, let my father and mother stay here with you so that they may be safe, and until I know what God will do for me. So David left his parents with the king of Moab. And Saul had heard that David and those with him had been located. Again, the word keeps coming to Saul of where David is, but every time Saul gets there, David is gone, because David has people that are, informing him as well. And we come into, and it just continues to go. In chapter 23, David goes up and routs the Philistines in battle. And he asks God, should I do this? And God's word to David is, yes, go. I will be with you and I will provide victory. Chapter 24, Saul has come back from following the Philistines, and he's still looking for David, and David is hiding out, and they find out that David is in this wilderness of En-Gedi. So Saul takes 3,000 men and goes looking for him. And David and his men hide deep within a cave. And Saul goes into that cave to relieve himself, to go to the bathroom. I mean, this is one of the funny stories in here. But while this is happening, David sneaks up behind and rather than kill Saul, cuts off a piece of his cloak, cuts off a piece of his garment. Saul finishes his duties and goes out. And returning to his horses, his chariots, his men, and David comes out of the cave and says, my Lord King. David isn't insubordinate or anything, but, and David says, here, I had an opportunity. I could have put you to the sword, but look what I have in my hand, a piece of your robe that I cut off while you were here, and Saul understands then that David means him no harm, and they have peace again for a little while. As we end chapter 24, David doesn't go back with the king, but there is a truce, an understanding. And, the intrigue of all of this that goes on it's an interesting story of how God is working within these two leaders of these people that he has